Jenkins will be here. The Lindsay Jenkins meeting should be a very interesting meeting again. It's Lindsay, it's always very well informed. When's Greg comes back? Greg will... Can't hear you. You should have to hear it.
No.
Put your hearing on,
No.
Put your hearing aid on then. Greg will lead this entirely himself. As we run this today, we will do a 1 hour tape on the camera, have a break as usual, tea and coffee, and then we'll go back and do another hour. Yes?
The referendum rally in London is on the 27th.
I know, it is.
Put another one off for a week.
I've been trying to get Michael Ward on the trips to talk about that. It is possible we might cancel it, you know, if that is the case. Saturday and Sunday is a bit of a, you know. Anyway, we'll see what Michael says. I've been trying to get him in the week, but haven't managed to do so. Welcome everybody. Anyway, I shall now hand over directly to Greg, and Greg will hand it without a mic, and I shan't introduce him because he's almost impossible to introduce. He is, in fact, what you'd call an email celebrity rather than... but that's how we got to know him. Okay, Greg, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you indeed, Robert. Good afternoon, and sorry to ruin what was otherwise probably the last weekend of the summer for you. I thought I'd call this meeting today to arrange an election on the 25th of October, but should I do it in a Scottish accent? Because there is every chance, so stay on your toes. As you know, my name is Greg Lance-Watkins, and one thing I am not is a Europhobe. Now, many people will be succumbing to the new language of the European Soviet, which is to call Euro-realists and Eurosceptics Europhobes. Always, at every opportunity, pull them up on it. We're not frightened of the EU, and that is the meaning of phobe. It is an irrational fear. You may be arachnophobe, but not Europhobe, not if you're informed. If you're not very informed, you may well be a Eurosceptic, in which case you don't actually believe in it. Well, I can see it from the coast of Dover. We've seen it from the coast of Dover many times in history and had to make sure it stays there. I had thought that there was a possibility of somebody else being on this platform introducing, and I worked it out driving up here in the car, that our collective ages would have taken us back to the height of empire, wouldn't they, Harry? With Queen Victoria. At which stage, the British Army had never, ever suffered a major defeat in modern history. It wasn't until the Zulus ran them ragged around South Africa that it happened. We have rescued Europe from themselves on a regular basis through history. I think we're going to have to do it again. And many of you may recall a myth about me, that I produced a bullet at a meeting inciting people to fight. That was done by the people who supported the European Soviet. And I call it a European Soviet because it is a collective Soviet of nations. It is a supranational Soviet of nations. And I don't hold that bullet up, and before anybody who calls the police, it's actually First World War and it's a lighter, but never mind, it makes the point. If we don't solve this problem that we have as a country where our politicians and our corrupt snivel servants are selling us out, We are being hollowed out from within. We cannot blame the Germans. We cannot blame the French. We cannot blame the Italians, the Dutch, or the Spanish. It's our own damned fault. Nobody else's. Don't pass the buck. It's not Europe. They're doing what they want to do. They're doing exactly what they want to do. And we're not standing up to say we don't want it. Just say no. Now, a lot of people may have seen this pertaining to drugs. Then UKIP lifted it. It actually started, interestingly, pardon the striptease, in Wales. And it was started by myself and a very courageous lady, who I'd like you all to remember, a staunch Labour supporter. Her name was Caris Pugh. Caris Pugh, Betty Bowen and I founded the opposition to the devolution and devolved irresponsibility of Wales. We'll come back to devolved irresponsibility because I'm going to say a few words at some stage about our health service, of which I know far too much, and they know too much about the inside of my life. You will note I dress like a reject from the Taliban. There is actually quite a good reason. I got cut in half about 6 years ago this month with kidney cancer. Because our hospitals are so filthy, I got MRSA in the wound. As a result of that, I wound up with a hernia across a 14-inch wound that they can do nothing about. That is a product of the devolved irresponsibility of devolution. If you believe you have a national health service, forget it. You no longer have a national health service. You may well be paying for a national health service. You may well be paying for a Department of Health. You also pay for some terribly expensive politicians who spend their time having terribly expensive lunches and producing far more hot air for global warming than the planet could produce on its own, because since over 75% of our laws are passed in and imposed from Europe, and since over 75% of our entire civil service works for the European Soviet against our best interests, those politicians were supposed to be controlling our health service through the Department of Health. Sounds sensible. All the expertise is in the health service. No problem on the expertise, but they spend most of their time ticking boxes. Is there anybody a doctor? You're a doctor, sir. Am I right? You don't think so? In what area, sir?
The curse of the health service is bureaucracy.
And it comes from what? Introducing how many layers of bureaucracy?
They agree.
Quite right. Exactly my point, sir. Which is that having the three basic bodies that should be able to run a health service, what have we got as well? Well, all the drug decisions are supposedly made by a quango called NICE. And then the quango called NICE has meeting after meeting after meeting. Sutent, Nexavar, and other drugs of that ilk have been available on the world market. They are available in every European country, except Britain. They are specific cancer drugs for kidney cancer. And for 6 years, I've been dealing with friends of mine, friends because they've had the same disease, dying because NICE won't approve the drugs. Why won't they approve them? God alone knows. Then, when they do start to approve drugs in desperation, the next thing comes in, you'll never guess, bureaucracy. We have an organisation called the NHS Trust. And the NHS Trust works for an entire, you wouldn't believe it, would you, if I said region And the regions are broken up with another layer of democracy. PCTs. This is a collection of superannuated idiots who basically don't do any work. They just have council meetings. The Scottish equivalent made a decision on Sutent the other day, which is produced by Kaiser. Yeah, it's expensive, but I think everybody's life is worth money, and we must have a cut-off. But they made the decision. Out of a committee of, as I recall, it was 42, 16 bothered turning up. The others were playing golf. It was a Friday afternoon. So as a result of that, they didn't have enough people to pass the drug for use in Scotland. So Scotland is quite specifically, and so are most areas in Britain, carrying out a process of bureaucratically authorized euthanasia. Nothing more complicated than that. I have challenged them in meetings. Can they find the Act of Parliament passed at Westminster that authorizes euthanasia? No one can find it. But ladies and gentlemen, the health service is using it as a cost and budget control, despite the fact that I understand that the health service has on its books 14 Volkswagen Touaregs and 8 Porsche sports cars. 8 Porsche sports cars. I'm not in that bracket. Anybody like to tell me what a new Porsche is? 70, 80,000? How much is a Volkswagen Touareg? They run out about 45, don't they? You've been reading the magazines, haven't you? That's the only place I see them as well. It gives you an indication of how our society is being hollowed out. Completely hollowed out. It's also interesting when you start looking at this, what do these people have in common to gain? And I'm not going to go down the road of common purpose, not because it's anything other than absolutely right, but because there are people who you've heard from and you're in contact with, and I will call on later this afternoon to make a couple of points about it. However, to revert for a second, I would ask you, never, ever, ever tolerate from anyone being called a Europhobe. Because he who controls the language controls the thought process. And this happens continuously. And the EU are masters of it. What, me, racist? If I produced this, I'd get locked up. Because it's got Rasta, and it's got little nigger boys, and but it's produced by the EU, so it must be all right. Endlessly, they are undermining our society. Now, we talk of common purpose, and I will gloss on from common purpose, and I would suggest you've got a copy of that if you can get one. Who's Who of the Elite. It includes the Skull and Bones Society, all their members. It includes the Council for Foreign Relations, all their members. It includes the Trilateral Commission and all their members. It's a bit boring, but most of the answers are in there. Produced by Robert Gaylor in the States. Some of you may have read others of his books. I thought this was quite fun. European Community Finances. That's what you get for your money. but they don't sign the accounts. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever seen the acquis communautaire. It's 186,000 pages. Oh, that doesn't count translating it into the 27 main recognized languages. So I worked it out one day. It's just over 1/3 of a mile long if you put it on shelves as normal books. But never mind. Don't be too perplexed at that, because those are the laws we have to live by. But you'll be pleased to know that to go with that, somewhere I have a copy of, is that it? We have a constitution. That's the original that they were trying to foist on us. Oh, the new Europeans are now have changed their vocabulary. They used to say that it is, the new version is a treaty, not a constitution. But they realized they weren't getting away with it. From about the beginning of last week, you'll find that every politician in Europe is speaking off the same hymn sheet. It is not a treaty. It is not a constitution. It is a new version of the Constitution with the constitutional bits removed. But never mind, ladies and gentlemen, you'll be pleased to know that it's going to come out about this thick, and it should go on a nail in a shed down the bottom of the garden, as far as I'm concerned. But you are going to get it. And the reason you're going to get it is because you're being betrayed wholesale by your own politicians, regardless of party, and I mean regardless of party. There are many who have been elected on the good intentions of people in this room who are thoroughly enjoying being in the European Soviet and enjoying the high life and the luxury thereof. But never mind. Perhaps if I pass a few of these around, and you might like to study up on a small detail. These, ladies and gentlemen, if you could pass them back. I haven't got enough copies for everybody, but they're quite fun, actually. The EU has 186,000 pages of rules, regulations, and laws against you. Those, by the way, are your rights. Published, as you can see, in the front, by the European Union. And it says on the outside, if my arms are still long enough, can anybody read this out? Because I can't. It's much too small. But when you've actually got to use a magnifying glass to read your rights, it's a bit damn stupid, isn't it? My fundamental rights in the European Union. So I'm glad of that, aren't you? At least we're safe. We've got rights. And that is the sum total. That is their constitution. It just doesn't seem fair to me. There's 400 million of us. How many politicians are there apart from too many? But they've got an awful lot of rights over us, haven't they? It does put it in some perspective, albeit a rather scary perspective. Now, I've been to a lot of meetings over the years, none in the last few years for health reasons. And I've always noticed, especially when you're listening to things on radio or you're listening to videos or DVDs of meetings, that at the end they have a period of questions. And they always run out of time for the questions. You never see the speaker run out of time, do you? So I'm going to change things a little bit. And I'm going to talk about the things you want to hear about, Not the things I want to tell you about, because most of you know more about it than I do. Because I'm only young and, you know, it goes like that. And there's a collective knowledge in here that way surpasses mine. And there are specialist knowledges here that way surpass mine. And to bore you rigid with my opinions isn't going to help anybody, really. What I want to do is pull out from you, as an audience, your areas of skill. What have you seen that really worries you? Was it the fact that your rights are a little bit limited? Was it that there is no democracy of any meaningful sort in the European Union? None whatsoever. You will realize that the European Union is run by a Politburo, namely the commissioners, unelected. The people don't elect the Commission, unelected, and they dream up their fantasy ideas as puppets through the smoke and mirrors for much bigger powers, which are behind globalism, behind communism. And it's a cross between a large C and a small c. And we can go back and we can go through how we got here, because that's quite a good way to work out how we unget here. In other words, if you're going to build a house from the base up, it's very difficult to actually blow it up in one go. You basically have to dismantle it. Otherwise, people stand a risk of being hurt and damaged. And since we now have 400 million people in the European collective of nations, controlled by a Politburo, electing from party lists representatives who are not there to represent you. At no stage are they there to represent you. They are there to represent the European Union to you. They are there as salesmen to sell out your country to you. Nothing more complicated than that. And then you have all sorts of sales reps. They're the sort of next layer down of snivel servants who are peddling this machine as hard as they can. When you think there are 15,000 lobbyists in the European Parliament in Brussels, 15,000. Can somebody tell me how many civil servants you'd need to have 15,000 lobbyists? Oh, by the way, you're paying for that civil service. Now, I had a big war about 2 years ago with Margot Wallström. She is head of propaganda for the European Union. She's got some fancy title, but basically her job is propaganda. And she is a commissioner, and she said she had a civil service smaller than Glasgow City Council. I asked her to identify the 450 offices Glasgow City Council had in Britain. Because the European Union has got 450 offices in Britain, around the country. They have an office in your local library, selling their product. All of the library staff are trained to sell the product. They have offices in your local universities to sell the product. All of the staff have to collude to sell the product. Now, we've been a fairly free and open society over the years, as a result of which many of you will know of a Professor Miliband, who left Warsaw just before the war, a Polish Jew, got out before the ghetto, and he went to Brussels to shelter. But it all got a little bit hot in Brussels, so he came to Britain to shelter. And he worked in the North East London College, which is now a university because they've upgraded all the kindergartens to universities, as you've probably noticed. And he was an outspoken, dedicated Marxist. He was quite happy to be protected as a Polish Jew from the ravages that crossed Europe by Britain. But he came here with the intention of destroying our society. You may know his two sons. One of them is a cabinet minister. The other one is in the government. The Miliband boys. One has to wonder if they might be just a tad biased. I'm not going to say they are biased, because I have no proof of that. But it does seem a very strange background, doesn't it? Now, somewhere in this heap of stuff, I have photographs of Jack Straw. Anybody know anything about Jack Straw? Do you remember the incident? Right, he was. I don't have the details of that incident, I know of it. Together with Tariq Ali, who many of you will remember, Jack Straw, let's not call it a riot because I wouldn't like to grace it with those words, in a disturbance in Cambridge, smashed the windows, I think they were 1470, the stained glass windows in the Senate building, and legged it, and was let into the women's quarters, the two of them, by an Australian girl who wouldn't let the police follow in because it was women's quarters. You may have heard of her. Her name's Patricia Hewitt. Funny old world, isn't it? When he left university, after being leader of the Students' Union through the 60s riots, which you may recall, Jack Straw chanting "pig, pig, pig," and hurling paving stones out of the windows of the LSE, this fine upstanding man was given a job by another communist, a certain Barbara Castle. His first job when he left university, I understand, was writing a report on the college where Professor bloody Millipede was. We should have sent him back to Europe, I think, because I don't see that as honesty. And I do believe in hospitality. I do believe in immigration. I don't have a problem with immigration. In fact, you only need to look round this room to realize that there's a number of people here who, by their racial characteristics and facial appearances and builds, probably only came to this country 3-4 generations ago in one format or another. Otherwise, we'd all be alike, wouldn't we, basically, because we'd never have had in any new blood and we'd never have altered. And we'd all look much more similar. This country is actually genetically very British. But we do have some very strong strains from other peoples. And if you want to look at the genetics of people moving into countries, it's really quite interesting. They opened up some graves. This is digressing for a moment, but it is pertaining to a major problem that people see at the moment of immigration. They opened up some graves, and I can't remember if it was Guildford or Reading, and they were from the interface of the Saxons. And when they tested these Saxons, they found that the astonishing thing about this Saxon graveyard was they had longer long bones. Yeah? In other words, by measuring the thigh bone, it was longer than the indigenous people. And when later they started to do DNA on all of these people, they said, this is funny. There's a whole batch of the women here who have the DNA of the indigenous people before these people arrived. And they spent years trying to puzzle it out. And I remember having a conversation with somebody at the British Museum who'd been doing this for 7 years. And I said, well, it's bloody obvious, isn't it? He said, why? And I said, invading armies like girls with long legs. And it was as simple as that. That is how our society has been built up. Intermixing, intermarrying, and progressing. The difference this time round is numbers. You cannot swamp a society with another. It doesn't even need to be ethnic group. Another mindset, another religion, etc. It becomes an interface problem. This, of course, makes it so much easier for the European Union, doesn't it? If we have everybody in the country having punch-ups over race, disagreements over immigrants, is anybody actually addressing the problem of our country is being handed over to foreign and utterly alien rule? Anybody know anything about corpus juris?
Yes. Yes.
You do, sir.
Well,
What aspects of it?
I think we all know that the opposite of habeas corpus, under corpus juris, the European system, you can be banged up on some suspicion and you're guilty until you're proved innocent. Simple as that. Completely doing away with habeas corpus, and all our highly paid opposition people are not doing anything about it.
So you can prove yourself innocent.
The simple difference is that, according to British law, habeas corpus, you are free until you are proven guilty. According to Napoleonic law, corpus juris, you are guilty until you manage to prove somehow that you are free.
Somewhere I've got a copy of the book, Corpus Juris, on which this is all founded. Can I reduce it to something slightly simpler?
Can I ask you, does Alvida fit in anywhere?
Who?
Alvida.
I've no idea. Do you smoke it or drink it?
No, you are it.
I know nothing of it, I'm afraid. Let us for a moment look at corpus juris in slightly simpler terms. Somewhere I've got a book called Corpus Juris. Yes, I knew I'd find it. Slight aid memoir. Interestingly, under Corpus Juris, you're allowed to do nothing unless you are given the legal authority to do it. Under British common law, and I use the word intentionally British because if we stand together, we stand a chance of standing. If we get broken up into the 10 little kingdoms, which I discovered a poem published in 1798 in Judy magazine, I promise I don't read it often, it referred to breaking Britain into 10 little kingdoms to make it easier for a conqueror to take it over while we squabbled. That was in 1998, and it won a £1 prize in a magazine for the best poem. And I've sent it round on email many times, and anybody who's got a copy, please send it to your friends, because it does just have a frisson of danger to it. It reminds one. Under British law, did you know that I can walk up to you and hit you on the head with a hammer? I can. Except they passed a law to protect you, saying I can't. Did you know under corpus juris I'm not allowed to own a hammer unless they've passed a law to say I can? Now, to me, that is tantamount to a vet looking at a horse's teeth by lifting its tail. It doesn't make sense to me, because what they've forgotten in Europe that we have known as a result of, before British common law, Roman law that was imposed in Britain was totally different to the Justinian law that was imposed right across Europe. It was intentionally different. It was the law handed down by Brutus. And it was handed down to the British because they were to be given a great deal of autonomy because they had an ordered society. Unlike Justinian law, which was set up by the Emperor Justinius to suppress the tribes who were trying to overthrow Rome. Now, I might be able to find it in here. I think it's page 42, as I recall. Yeah, here we go. Who's got the right reading glasses on? Would you mind reading from there to the end of that paragraph, please? What we
propose is a set of penal rules which constitute a kind of corpus juris, limited to the penal protection of the financial interests of the European Union, designed to ensure, in a largely unified European legal area, a fairer, simpler and more efficient system of repression. Can I just make the point?
A system of repression? Is that actually what our law is there for?
Yes, and that's what it says here.
I know. That is corpus juris, ladies and gentlemen. A scary concept, really. It's set up to suppress and repress the people.
Can I just make the point that since 1992, when corpus juris got ascendancy, no less than 1,100 people have died in police custody. These are police figures.
Is this in the UK?
In the UK. And not one successful prosecution has been able to be brought against the police because under corpus juris they are part of the government and therefore they are above the law.
Correct.
I really have to object to that, and I'll tell you why. I served as a police officer. Most people who die in police custody are in fact drunks who actually choke on their own sick, when they've been sick. Police officers, when they have drunks in the cells, are required by the law of the land to check on those people every 15 minutes. If you have somebody who is at risk...
Totally agree with you. It is perfectly true that anyone...
Can I finish?
No, I'd rather you didn't, because we're going to get diverted onto police at a much earlier stage than I would wish to. We will be coming back to police.
Let me just say, right, that in fact, most people who die in police cells are drunks. If you are at risk at all in a police cell, you are required by law to be checked every 15 minutes. This is required to be entered on your custody record. The officer who checks you signs it with his name. He has to be prepared to justify the fact that you are dead by the fact that you died in the 15 minutes between the one check and the next check. Other than that, police officers in the custody suite, they normally have a sergeant in charge of custody, plus an assistant who's a police constable, who wanders around the custody suite and looks in the bars or through the little grill to make sure that people are still alive in between those times.
Times change. I have one name for you, De Menezes. 5 bullets.
Hear, hear. De Menezes was murdered on the streets of this country by police totally out of control. Thank you. Let me now pass on since...
He did not die in a police cell.
Correct. He was shot by out-of-hand police on the streets.
Why was he running?
Why was he running?
He was sitting in a tube when he was
He was
killed.
sitting in a tube.
With 6 police
Read the
officers.
report.
Yeah, he just got onto the tube.
There were 6 policemen holding him down.
They were holding him down when he was shot.
7 bullets killed him.
Did he
while
run?
was being held down.
One to his shoulder, one to his neck, and 5 to his skull.
And why was he running?
Have you never run for a tube? Well, have you never run for a tube?
Well, they had followed him from his house. He
Pardon?
wasn't just running for the tube.
No. Shall I tell you what happened?
Well, no, I did read it in the paper, but I just...
So it must be true. It must definitely be true. It was in the papers. And this was in the papers as a point of interest. And since we're on the subject of police, this happened to me last week. The newspaper article reads, "Police are investigating an alleged serious sexual assault on a man believed to have occurred in Chepstow." By the way, that's not what happened to me. That's something else. The incident, which was reported on August the 2nd, is alleged to have happened between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. at the top of Maple Avenue. Now, I won't bore you with the rest, but I put a note. I don't know how many of you know Chepstow. I put a note onto the newspaper's website where they have opportunity for comment, and I said, could it possibly be that the council has seen fit to impose a degeneration programme on the centre of Chepstow, seek to profit from both rates and parking, debase the town with ever more planning permissions for gambling establishments, drinking establishments, prolonged drinking, nightclubs and such, with no increase in amenities of consequence, policing of competence, planning with consideration, hand in glove with the tasteless naff statuary, huge amounts of money squandered, and utterly inappropriate and antisocial imposition of badly sited hostels for aliens, immigrants, and the homeless. Could the loss of self-respect induced in Chepstow by its governance have something to do with this violent obscenity? I think that was Wednesday week ago. Last Friday, I was out on Friday afternoon. Lee, my wife, received a phone call. Jim Walker, could I speak to Greg Lance-Watkins, please? I'm sorry, he's out. Oh, could you get him to call me, please? Yes, certainly. What's your number? Bum, bum, bum. And you were? Jim Walker. And it was a Newport code. So when I came back in, I said, what was it about? And she said, I asked him. He asked who I was. I said, it's Lee, Greg's wife. And he said, it's about a rape. Click. I know many a couple who by Monday morning would have had a divorce. What an irresponsible action. But I thought maybe it's important. So I phoned them up. Phoned the number. It was on answer phone. He'd gone home for the weekend. Leaving someone he'd never met with the nagging doubt that possibly their husband had something to do with a rape for the weekend. There's responsible action. So I thought, right, it might be important. So I phoned up the local police station. Needless to say, there was no answer because they were all in the canteen, I expect. I went through to a call centre in Cwmbran. Is there anybody in Chepstow police station? Don't know. And I said, well, it's regarding a rape. Oh, how can I help you? Righto. It's the old adage, isn't it? They won't come if it's a burglary, but tell them that you've just shot somebody, you'll have 10 cars round in 3 minutes. And get your burglary solved. But they said, oh, that would be Inspector Walker at Chepstow police station. And I said, well, they said he's gone home for the weekend. And I said, well, it was about a rape. I think I ought to speak to somebody just in case it was urgent. She said, certainly. She riffled through, and I said, he's next down the line. And she put me through. She said, I'll put you through to Chepstow, to his office. I get through. The phone is answered, Detective Sergeant Edwards. And he says, Detective Sergeant Edwards. No, hello. No, how can I help you? Who am I speaking to? Nothing. Doesn't do much for the police, does it? Perhaps Jack Straw with his chanting wasn't far out on today's police. Anyway, I said, I was asked to call a Jim Walker. He said, that would be Inspector Walker. And I said, well, congratulate him when you see him. Because I wasn't very happy about any of this, as you can well imagine. And he said, what was it about? No, please, no, thank you. And I said, it was something to do with a rape. He said, oh, I don't know anything about that. I said, well, it could have been the John the Straw rapes. What do you know about that? And I said, hang on, is this 20 questions? I said, or it could have been the rape of the man, the male rape that's reported in the press. He said, who am I speaking to? I said, Greg Lance-Watkins. He said, oh, yes, I remember now. And I said, oh, good, how can I help? And he said, the council's phoned us up. And they're very worried and think you might know something about this rape. And I said, really? Why? And he said, do you know anything about it? And I said, the only thing I've heard, and I've heard it from several sources, and I said, but it's only hearsay, is that it was 3 Polish guys. And I said, but I've no idea. And he said, I have to warn you. And I said, no, you don't. He said, I'm cautioning you, and this is over the phone, yeah? Your statement could be construed as incitement to racial hatred. And I said, get a life. Why don't you get off your duff and go and solve the crime? He said, no, this is very serious. And I said, what? Fitting it in between your race awareness course and your gender reassignment course, are you? And he said, I can see where this is going. And I said, too damn right. And you may have noticed who started it. I am disgusted by your attitude. I'm disgusted by your manners. I'm disgusted by your method of policing. And why don't you get off your duff and either resign or go and do some police work and try and arrest somebody for raping a guy in the street. Good day to you. And I hung up. So, what? To them to inspect themselves? No, I didn't bother.
Well, you should do.
Again?
Unless people complain.
Again? No, I took one step which I would submit was slightly better. I put into the website of the newspaper, I've complained 11 times about the police. Formal complaints that went all the way through to Lord Scarman on one occasion, who was a personal family friend, and he could do nothing about it. So I put on the website in the newspaper, hi, something of an update on this case. I gather D.S. Edwards and Jim Walker, his boss, are in fact in hot pursuit of the serious allegations of sexual discrimination, as it has been rumoured that the attack was carried out by a non-woman, which is a serious crime under the Sex Discrimination Act to have defined the gender. Once they have finished harassing law-abiding citizens for discussing the rumour, there is every chance that they might consider the matter of the allegations of rape made in the press, unless, of course, the council has another politically correct errand to send them on. It's happening every day. It's part of hollowing out our society. It's part of undermining it. It's a part... Go to Chepstow. It looks like... What's that little town we were in the south coast the other day? Oh, it's just like that. It's got the same naff paving. It's got the same tasteless statues. It's got the same totally irrelevant slogans carved into the stonework. It's got the same couple of fish to show that this town was founded on fishing. It's just the same. It's called strip the identity of the people. And it's happening up and down this country. And really, we've all seen it, but are we aware that we can actually do something about it? Some of you at the front, I don't know how far back they went, but there's some more for people who didn't get a copy, and those can be passed back to people who didn't have copies. Take a cream one and a grey one. You can do things even as Joe Citizen. During the devolution of Wales, which nobody in Wales wanted, realistically, a sort of vociferous minority, during the devolution, I opposed the devolution. When it became obvious, I thought, well, what should we do about it? So I registered a company, because I thought it would be rather fun. I registered the Welsh Assembly. And they spent thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of our pounds changing its name to the much more appropriate National Ass for Wales, which just about says it all, doesn't it? They thought it meant assembly, everybody else knows what it means. Including, I understand, National Ass for Wales, National Assembly. It abbreviates superbly. The only trouble was Ron Davis misunderstood it. He thought it was literal. Hence his interlude wearing his wife's dress and tripping round Clapham Common, which you may recall. But you know, I'm just Joe Citizen. And I registered a company to register my protest, to register my opprobrium at what they were doing. And I read up on things to outquote them. And it really is quite fun, because I have now had for 8 years a publicly stated, I challenge any recognized British politician who is a highly paid professional in a fair and free discussion on mainstream, high-volume media, television, high volume being a sensible time, to give me one single, solitary good reason why these United Kingdoms should be ruled and governed by an alien, undemocratic, unaccounted collection of bureaucrats and civil servants in Brussels or in Strasbourg and anywhere else they can go on holiday. Just one reason, and I'll shut up forever. As long as I can't, in 90 seconds, with a fair distribution of time between us, so he can ask a lot of questions, he can make a lot of points, I can't in 90 seconds without warning show how that is outclassed by its cost or its damage to these United Kingdoms. And I've made that challenge in the newspapers, I've made it on the internet, I've made it from platforms, I've made it directly to politicians. Not one of them will take me on. I was scheduled to go out to Brussels with Jonathan Evans, MEP, and we were going out, and I was going out on the Eurostar, being collected by ITV, and we were going to have dinner on the Eurostar and discuss the EU over dinner, and obviously it was going to be edited and so on, because he's an MEP. They wouldn't have wanted everyone to know how expensive the wine was, would they? We were going to spend a full day wandering around the EU, and then I was going to interview, in hostile interview, Neil Kinnock, who was a commissioner at the time. 1 hour before the car was due to turn up to pick me up, they phoned me up and said, sorry, it's off. And I said, why? And they said, Neil Kinnock discovered it was you and he's not prepared to be interviewed. So, have courage. We can win. And the proof of that is Neil Kinnock, the British Commissioner, Lord, terribly important now, was too frightened to be interviewed by me live on camera. And if I, and at that stage I was a provincial book dealer, frightened him so much he wouldn't have the interview, it's going to collapse. I think we ought to take a break now, unless anybody has any immediate questions off of this first section. And we can reconvene in, what, half an hour and do the same again, and then have another break. And that way, I think we can get through more topics, more subjects, and bring out more of your ideas. Sir?
I would like to ask one thing. Isn't it possible for people like yourself and many others like us to get the other people in some of the other European states to act together?
I think this is a very, very good point. To a great extent, we do try to act with them. I had a great deal to do with the French personally during their referendum on the Constitution. There's one major drawback. When you take a nation of people, like the French, how many of you have been to France? How many of you haven't? Would probably be easier, wouldn't it? The majority of you have been to France. And you come across, in France, these wonderful little walled towns. They're all over France, aren't they? Big, long distances, and then there's another walled town. There's a very good reason for that. It's because armies have marched to and fro across Europe for centuries, whether it was the 7-Year War, the 100-Year War, the Visigoths, the Goths, you name them, they've all had a go at it. You know, they even believed that Odin's horse had 6 legs. The reason was that the horsemen of those days came off of the steppes of Russia, and they rode little tiny horses, and they rode with 2 horses all the time and swapped horses every hour. And so when you saw the horsemen that threatened your village and you sent your women and children to hide in the forest, you saw these horses riding along with 6 legs. Yeah? Because the front legs of the baggage horse, or the spare horse, were in line with the back legs of the other one. So they were utterly convinced they were being overrun by 6-legged horses. So it's very, 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 very deep in the psyche of the European Union to avoid warfare. They don't understand that warfare is about defense, not just purely about aggression. You also have the problem that the majority of people in Wales or Scotland, for instance, didn't vote in favour of devolution of Wales or Scotland. I promise you they didn't. They voted against rule by Westminster. Very different. And when you go to France, you'll find that the people of the Bretons, the Normans, the Loire, the Marseillais, the Basques, etc., voted in favour of a European Union. Why did they vote in favour of it, for God's sake? What on earth is in it for them, apart from the CAP? Quite simple, they didn't want to be ruled by Paris, the anarchs of Paris. And the anarchs of Paris, anarch being the ruling class, are the European University for Parisians. So they have a very, very different mindset and thought.
How about the Dutch, though? I thought they were closer to us than any of them.
Somebody's frightened they'll pull the plug out of the dike. They're so dependent on the rest. Shall we call a halt there? Because I think we're running out of film, we're running out of tape, we're running out of everything. Thank you indeed. I'd like to mention somebody many of you know. Ashley Moat. It is unfortunate that he let his private life collide, and I can use no other expression, with his public life. He's been a friend of mine for many years. He is currently serving a prison sentence for fraud with the benefits agency. He is still a friend of mine. I believe that the British government, and this is a personal belief, I believe the British government in spending nearly £1 million prosecuting a man on an allegation of benefits fraud after they had previously bankrupted him is not justice. It may be European law, but it sure to hell isn't justice. On that point, I make no judgment of whether he was guilty or innocent. I don't know adequate of the facts. I have known Ashley for 10 years. I have never known him late on a bill. I have known him struggle to pay the odd bill, but I've never known him default on anyone. And if he is guilty, I am A, surprised, and B, sorry. More than that, I don't think any of us need to say. He is currently, for your record, was taken from court, and he went to Winchester for 2 days, Her Majesty's Prison Winchester. He is currently serving the balance of his sentence at Ford Open Jail. You can write to him there if you wish to, and he would welcome the support. And I would like to thank an individual in this room who can remain anonymous, who gave me a letter to send to him with a number of signatures from members of his supporters.
Bernard would like to add their support.
Thank you indeed. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm glad you made those points. The thought had occurred to me, only he's been such a powerful thorn in the side of the EEC, such an embarrassment to them, and knowing how these people work and what they're capable of, the thought had occurred to me as to whether it may have been a very complicated and convoluted stitch-up.
I would say that it was convoluted. I would say it was complicated. I have my own opinion on whether it was a stitch-up, but let us say that it somewhat grieves me that £1 million of my money was used to prosecute somebody who, it was alleged and subsequently proven, I accept, to the court's satisfaction, had purloined the sum total of only £73,000, 10 years before he was elected to office. He has my support. He has the support of a number of people. And I hope that he comes back to politics. Because, to be honest, it is my personal opinion, and I'm quite prepared to go on filmed record saying that one Ashley Moat in prison is a damn sight better than most of the UKIP MEPs in Brussels drunk. Shall we move on from that point? Yes, David?
Well, UKIP leadership has often accused you of undermining UKIP and dragging its name in the gutter. How do you respond to their allegations?
I think that's a very fair comment. I supported Nigel Farage for 10 years. I supported him hell or high water, and I supported him as UKIP's performing monkey. He is a very good speaker, far better than me, but then again he gets paid a lot more than I do for speaking. That's not a hint, honestly. And he doesn't have to rely on things like this to get away with it. He is a superb performing monkey. He is probably the best floor speaker in British politics today, when he's sober. However, his morality I have no time for. His sense of responsibility I have no time for. If you want to behave as he behaves, then don't go into public life. I support him still, to this day, but I always said from the first day I met him that I would never support him and would strenuously oppose him if he ever stood for leadership. And a fact in provenance of his inability to lead the party. I have also pursued some of their internal frauds. Tom Wise, his bank accounts, in which he defrauded the taxpayer deliberately and with intent, and used a false instrument to obtain money in the name of UKIP as an elected representative, colluded with by others in UKIP and beyond, who stole, amongst other things, £6,000 to buy himself a new car. It's all in here. It's his bank account records. I don't suppose he's very pleased that I have the copy of them. Anyone may look at them afterwards, by all means. Also, copies of his contracts with the European Union and signed copies of contracts by Lindsay Jenkins authorising the fraud. Probably not worth saying more than that, but I do hope they bring him to justice, because he was trying to take 180-odd thousand, 36,000 a year. And as a point of interest on that, £4,800 of that was handed over to Nigel Farage, stolen money, known to be stolen by Nigel, to settle a private debt he had. Now, I'm firmly on film. Sue me, Nigel. Sue me, UKIP. Because we have the proof, beyond all shadow of doubt, that every single member of UKIP's NEC and every single member, MEP, colluded in the cover-up of this crime, aided and abetted in the corruption by a retired police officer of senior rank, who, in my opinion, brought disgrace upon the Queen's Commission that he holds. Even though he's in retirement, it is every citizen's duty to report a felony, not to cover it up. And sorry, they have destroyed their position. I will not back EUKIP, which has gone native at the top, until the top 50 people in UKIP have been removed. I totally support their membership. I totally support the principles they originally claimed that got them elected. I utterly repudiate their actions since that date on all counts. Does it answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Taking what you just said about UKIP and what we know about the other parties, who would we support when the next general election is called?
I think that we have to do what I did in the last election. I went and I constructively abstained from voting by making the statement on my ballot papers, leave the EU. Nothing else. Now, a lot of people say that's a spoilt vote. No, it's not. Go to a count. Who's been to a count here? Right, quite a few of you have been to counts. You will have noticed that they get a wheelbarrow full of Labour votes, they get 3 buckets full of Tory votes, they get a fistful of Liberal votes, and no one looks at them. Do they? No one. They get a stack of spoiled votes, and they go through every single damn one of them. And they argue about every single one of them, and they discuss every single one of them. I would say a constructive vote is to write leave the EU on your ballot, because that way your ballot will be looked at and it will have cognizance given to it. There may not be very many, but it doesn't take very many. William Wilberforce set out more or less on his own, because slavery was banned in Britain in 1540 something. The first anti-slavery law in Britain was 11 something. But we still had slaves, until along came a politician who stood up and stood on his own to start with. And we brought in a ban on slavery worldwide because of one man. Because at the end of the day, somebody's got to make those first steps. We talk a lot about what's going wrong in this country, but we don't talk enough about how to put it right. Well, one way to put it right is to make your politicians accountable. Keep repeating the fact that John Major, and I'm on film here and he can take me to court as well, John Major was paid £1 million by the Carlyle Group to betray this country. £1 million cash. And if he got the Maastricht Treaty signed, he would have a job for life as a director of the Carlyle Group on a salary of £1 million a year. Not treason, is it? Couldn't be, could it? The Carlyle Group, an American arms corporation. He's their European director. He does nothing, because who the hell would employ John Major to do anything? $1 million a year salary he gets out of that.
One of the most powerful groups in America.
Yep. Tied in with Rumsfeld, tied in with Dick Cheney, tied in with the Bushes. Of course, Barbara Bush is German, isn't she? Oh, tied in with the DVD.
Many other MPs also belong to the Carlyle Group, our own MPs.
Did you know that in our House of Lords sit a whole collection of people by virtue of their betrayal of Britain? That's how they got their peerages, betraying Britain. Neil Kinnock's one. There are a number of them. Lord Plum's another. They became members of the House of Lords after they retired from selling our country out to in Europe in one way or another. It's very interesting that people overlook a man because he plays the fool. Biggest fool in British government, isn't he? Complete idiot. John Prescott. No. Repeatedly elected as an MEP. Each of the 3 parliaments a year while he was an MEP, he moved department to learn the job in every single one of the departments. This, of course, is a man who had been the head of the Siemens Union, who had had training in Russia. This is a man who colluded with the top end of the hard-line militant unions of those days. There is some sanity coming back into the union movement at the moment. Not a lot, but some. There is hope. John Prescott learnt one thing from the Russians, and I've dealt with Russians for many, many years on a political and military basis. And John Prescott learnt that the ambassador in an embassy is usually one of the drivers. The person who runs the embassy, he's a chauffeur. They have an ambassador who's urbane, terribly suave, can't make a decision on anything, not without asking the chauffeur. And that wasn't the chauffeur who was sleeping with Baroness Lay of the Labour Party, you may recall. Leader of the Labour Party in the House of Lords, wasn't she? Peter Jay's wife, for those who are looking puzzled. Daughter of eminent Labour politician who ended up having an affair while her husband was ambassador in Washington and was having an affair with one of the drivers, which about her intellectual level, actually.
She was Canada.
Callaghan's daughter?
Yes, Callaghan's daughter. Put into possession because she was Callaghan's daughter. Because, of course, years and years of the Labour Party criticising the Tories for being nepotists, but you ain't seen nothing yet until you start looking at the Labour Party. I think what we've got to do is call our politicians to account. Stop hiding behind mealy-mouthed words. The words are fraud, treason, lies. And they use them all the time. It is a political tool. It's why, when you stand in court, you promise to tell the whole truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Well, the truth is what you tell your constituents, isn't it? The whole truth is what you tell your party leader, and nothing but the truth is what you tell the newspapers, I suppose. All three totally different things, and maybe that's where it came from, three different types of truth. You had another question.
Yeah. To what extent do you think our paedophilia is rife amongst our political leaders?
I am aware that Tony Blair has a conviction for importuning in public toilets dated 1983, where he pleaded guilty under the name of Charles Linton and was fined £50 at Bow Street Magistrates Court, if that's of any assistance. I am aware that Gordon Brown spent much of his early years openly having, shall we say, an enthusiasm for what were underage rent boys. I am aware that he married late in life to a woman who had been with her partner in Macaulay Hobsbawm and was paid £140,000 to act as his fiancée because it was expedient. I am aware that she was paid a further £50,000 a year for as long as she stayed as his fiancée. The money to pay for that came out of the Black Widows Fund. The Black Widows Fund was the fund that set up the New Labour. That fund was actually Robert Maxwell's pension funds from the press. I am aware that Brenda Dean was given £6,000 cash to have a 4 months holiday she had in South America with her boyfriend. They both had new cars. When they came back, her mortgage was paid off, and she is now a member of the House of Lords. And that was her payola for not pursuing what happened to the pension fund. The pension fund then went off and sort of vanished. I hope I'm using enough names to keep this going. The pension fund then vanished, and it was Geoffrey Robinson, wasn't it, a co-director of Maxwell's newspaper organisation, and he funded the purchase of Sarah Macaulay. He supported Jack Straw's, when he was Home Secretary, Jack Straw's cover-up of Michael Straw's confession at Bilston Police Station, where Michael Straw admitted that he had been sexually abusing his 14-year-old son over a number of years, and Michael Straw also admitted, was eventually taken to court. Nothing happened about abusing his son because they tried to cover it up. I exposed that to the Sun newspaper. The Sun newspaper wrote up the story and couldn't do anything with it. I spoke to a mate of mine on the Sunday Telegraph. He wrote it up. His editor squashed it. We made the story stand up totally. I got on to Olga Maitland, Baroness Olga Maitland, who writes for, I think, the Daily Mail. And she said, fantastic story, I've stood it up. Yes, my editors blocked it. I spoke to Norman Tebbit, who wrote it up for his newspaper column, and it was blocked by the editor. I was warned. I was given Norman Tebbit's, Olga Maitland's, and 3 other people's home telephone numbers, mobile telephone numbers, personal mobiles, and personal direct lines, and they were given to Lee because they honestly thought that I might get taken out by Jack Straw. Does that give you an idea how our government runs? I eventually got on to Mohammed Al-Fayed at Harrods, And Mohammed Al-Fayed was fighting for his passport at the time and wasn't very friendly with Jack Straw. And he put me onto his political editor because at the time he owned Punch. And you may recall a picture of Jack Straw with his fist like that on the front page of Punch. Yeah? I've got a copy here somewhere. I'll see if I can dig it out afterwards. And I got 6 pages of this written up in Punch magazine. And it was the first Punch magazine for over a decade that had sold out on the day it was published. And it was sold out within 3/4 of an hour. And it was proof positive that they were covering for child abuse. Then we come on to the hollowing out of our society. I don't know how many of you know anything about Dunblane. Thomas Hamilton, paedophile, free access to Queen Victoria Boys' School, in and out of the school all the time. I started working on this rather a long time ago. Some of you are almost as decrepit as I and can remember the Kincora Boys' School, Northern Ireland, where the councillors were being, their payola was being given little boys from the children's homes. Lost in care. That was the report in Wales on the children's homes and the abuse of children in children's homes. Interestingly, after that report came out, not one single solitary person went to court. Not one. But the person who was in charge of children's homes got caught, and he went to prison for something completely different. But the minister responsible for it at the time took no action whatsoever. The minister at the time, as a point of interest, was a chap by the name of Ron Davis. Ron Davis, who made the mistake of calling me a bastard on a platform one day. And so I said, I'll have you. And I had him. I supplied all the information that had him under close surveillance on Clapham Common wearing his wife's frock, while sequentially giving oral sex to male strangers. I'm not going to make the obvious joke that leaves a bad taste in your mouth, but that was a government minister who was responsible for children's homes at the time. Then we have the Dunblane shootings. I cooperated with Sandra Utley for many years. Everybody who knows her will understand if I say she's a very damaged lady. She was one of the... It's a superb book. It lays it all out chapter and verse, and there's been a team of us who've spent 10 years of our lives digging. The government was involved. Government ministers were involved. The police were up to their neck in it. An organisation called the Speculative Society of Edinburgh was involved. The Spec is a secret society that involves all of the senior police officers in Scotland, all of the judiciary. And when you think that they call themselves a debating society that has been functioning since the late 1700s, and the Duke of Edinburgh is their honorary chairman or something, the Duke of Edinburgh went to their bicentenary, as I recall it was, and it didn't even appear in the Edinburgh Gazette that he was in Scotland. Well, we're back to exactly the same thing as with Common Purpose, aren't we? We're back to exactly the same thing as we are with the top end of the Masons. I have no problem with people who are Masons. It's lots of people like to belong to things. They haven't a clue what they belong to. But when you think that the Broderbund is a branch of Masonry, and the Broderbund was institutionally massacring blacks, it does make you pause for thought, doesn't it? And there are, 37 levels of Masonry? And very few people get past about 4 of them. And it's tied in with the Rosicrucians, it's tied in with the Knights of Malta, it's tied in with the Cathars. The Cathars, of course, don't exist, do they? They were done away with in the 1400s by the papacy. Were they as hell? Nobody even knows what the Cathars are, really. The Cathars are a body of people whose religion is based on the protection of the bloodline of Christ and his children. And from the origin of the Cathars, the early crusades were set up for the Cathars and paid for in the main by Richard the, whichever it was first, wasn't it? Including the Children's Crusade. And they went in, and Jerusalem, the streets of Jerusalem, the lanes, the blood was so deep that it was up to the hocks of the horses' hooves. And they threw the Saladin out of Jerusalem, and they came in, and after the 36 Cathar miners left Jerusalem, I think it was 12 days later, it was handed back to the Saladin and the Crusaders rode home. They were there looking for the evidence of the bloodline of Christ. They have empowered almost every Catholic royal family and power block ever since. We digress a little, my apologies, but it does tie in with paedophilia.
What are the chances that Gordon Brown...
One more very quick question, because we're running low on film.
Speak up. What are the chances that Gordon Brown is listed in the Cullen report?
Gordon Brown might not have been actually listed in the Cullen report because I've actually read the Cullen report from cover to cover, but I have not read the 27 shelf feet of evidence that was suppressed. Gordon Brown was mentioned in it. He had 2 meetings with Thomas Hamilton. He was not his MP. And Lord Robertson now was the MP for the area. He had 2 public battles with Thomas Hamilton in the street, withdrawing his son from, refusing his son the permission to join Hamilton's boys' club, accusing Hamilton outright of sexual abuse, etc., in public. And he knew all the details, and when I spoke to Langley, they said they knew about it, because when he was made Secretary of the United Nations, I said, oh, we can't have him. But Langley knew, so they could control him anyway. Interesting, isn't it? He was the man who signed Thomas Hamilton's letter saying he was fit and proper individual to have firearms. Shall we stop there? Yeah, we can do that when we're rolling. But it's a good point. There are some... I'm really not all that worried about threats. Lee worries like hell about it. But,
it would be nice though if some of these things could...
We're rolling again, I'm told.
It would be nice.
You had a question, sir.
Well, yeah, for the camera then, the question I raised was, given Greg's experience, knowledge, his ability to be a thorn in the side, does he feel that in many of his meetings, perhaps including this one, there's somebody from officialdom taking note and reporting back?
I would be very surprised if there wasn't. I did talk to the Cambridge Union some while ago, along exactly the same lines, also without notes, just off the top of my head, led by questions. And there were 2 burly individuals at the back who were quite blatantly not in the right place. And I said, look, rather than you take notes and be inaccurate, why don't you come up to the front and use a tape recorder? They were underwhelmed. But that meeting started at 6:30 and was supposed to end at 8:30. And we left the hall at 12:30 and we all went for a meal. We kept a restaurant open and 50 of us went for a meal. And we all eventually sort of left at about 3 o'clock in the morning. I must admit I was a bit tired driving back to Chepstow after that meeting.
Why did you work?
As for thorns inside, I have come under attack from all sorts of clandestine individuals, i.e. people you would expect would be attacking the European Union, and pretend to attack it, a lot of them. I'm sure more people in this room could tell me more about myself than I was ever aware of from the rumours that have been passed to them and the information as to who I am. There was a concerted effort from one person whose whole life is based on scams around the edge of the European Union and income from it, who wrote some of the most poisonous letters that you would reasonably expect to see, and they were sent to Robert to try and stop me speaking here. I won't name names. In that instance, they're misguided. They are not misguided to the extent of being as corrupt as government officials. Nobody elected them, and if somebody wants to do something fairly poisonous in their own time, at their own expense, bring it on. I'll give them a run for their money. Yes, sir. Sorry, I'm neglecting this end of the room, aren't I?
Have you ever heard of Notes from Borderland?
Notes from Borderland. Yes, I've heard of it. Indeed it does. I've never bothered reading it, but would you like to tell everybody what it appears in there for?
Well, they claim to have authentic knowledge about the hidden secret society, and a lot of these discussed is not good. Could you come here to break this microphone?
Yes, you
Hold on, let me give him a mic.
So, phrase it as a question, perhaps again for the camera.
One of the claims was, perhaps you don't want me to say this.
I'm perfectly happy.
Your providence was MI5 or MI6, I can't remember which.
Oh, I accept that. I have been accused of being MI5, MI6, CIA, FBI, DVD, KGB. No, I've actually got their card. It's in my wallet. Or did you mean Alcoholics Anonymous? I've been accused of all of these. The one thing I am looking forward to is, will they please pull their finger out and send me their check? Because I freely admit, and anybody can look at my bank accounts, Lee will give anyone full access to them. I have absolutely nothing to hide because I haven't got any money, so how the hell do you hide it? The great advantage of what I've done is, in my impunity, I've established the independence that millionaires strive for. Organizations like the Borderland or whoever it is, I don't know who's behind it, I don't a lot care, because if that's what they think I am, it shows their information is pretty dodgy. Because if I was working for MI5 or MI6, do you think that's likely? Do you think one word of what I've said today would be likely to emanate from them? I don't think so, somehow. MI5 are the people who have plans on the wall as to how to tie their shoelaces up, aren't they? And they cite their secret building on the opposite side of the Thames, so you can drive up with a rocket launcher on the other side and knock it down. You know, that really strikes me as intelligent. Yes, I've worked with intelligence services. I have never worked inside British politics with them. I make no bones about it. I have worked for my country. I am not, nor have I ever been MI5. I am not, nor have I ever been MI6. And I did not have sex with that woman.
It may interest you to know...
He did.
Long past. Then I received an astonishing number of emails and messages saying, "You're never going to allow that man to come to Marlborough Group. You must be mad. Don't you know who he is?" Telegrams, emails saying, "Harry, you're being used." Long time since I've been used. Don't you know the background of this man? He's dangerous.
I hope so.
My simple answer was, yes, he's a friend of mine.
Thank you, Harry. David.
To what extent do you think MI5 or MI6 are involved on the European Union side in the subversion of England?
110%. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that our secret services are totally suborned by the European Soviet. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that our civil service works for Europe. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that our politicians work for the EU. I have no doubt whatsoever that our upper house votes in favour of the EU because a huge number of them are on EU pensions. I have no doubt whatsoever that our police are as thick as bricks and haven't got a clue what they're doing, except for some of their senior officers, but only a tiny number of them, and they are totally controlled by Europol, but they don't really know what it is. But it is interesting to note that Europol, their website, if you go and look at it, their headquarters are in The Hague, in the same building that the Gestapo had during the war. Bad choice, bad choice.
Or a appropriate choice.
Not if you're trying to run propaganda. Yes, sir.
Yes. Apparently the EU said we can keep our pint and our mile till the kingdoms come. When does the kingdom come? Next week?
They said we could keep it till the kingdom come. What they didn't say was the kingdom had gone. Interestingly, I was chatting to Neil on Thursday this week. Neil Heron, I'm sure most of you know him. I've worked with Neil now since before Steve, because we were already looking at it. And then Steve Thoburn had his scales lifted. And I worked on the early stages of that, and I would like to say publicly thank you to Neil, because he got an EU award, you may recall, in the early stages. We rigged it all so that he got the vote, so that he got 5,000 quid. And he asked me what he ought to do with it, and I said, well, one thing you mustn't do with it is keep it. And he said, why not? To fund what we're doing. I said, because people will say you're only doing it for the money. And so he said, well, what do I do about it? And I said to him, well, I would be very grateful if you gave it to an organisation called Cancer Backup. And he gave the full amount of the award to Cancer Backup and got no publicity for it whatsoever. He refused it. So thank you very much, Neil. And also, let's not forget Steve, who was killed by the European Union. Steve was an ordinary, everyday market trader, greengrocer, who found himself way out of his intellectual depth, but by God he was determined. And eventually he had a massive coronary, leaving a wife and small children from the stress put upon a man without the education, completely out of his depth, being hammered by the full might of the law. Because, why? Because he sold a little old lady who did not understand metric measurements. He sold her a pound of bananas. Now, don't get carried away with the myth of this Dutch crook, the Commissioner for Trade, who said that we can keep our pounds, shillings and pence, we can keep our miles, we can keep our pint. We have already enacted the law that makes it illegal. As a result of that, the market before last Sunday, and I'm not sure which day of the week it was, a trader in a London market was arrested and had his scales stolen because they were imperial and metric. And the trading standards officers walked past 8 other stalls that had scales that were imperial only, because he's one of the metric martyrs. It's the 5th time he's been done, because they do tend to use very big hammers to crack very small nuts. It's happened time and again. Does that sort of...
So what you're saying is they may have said it in a speech, but the law's already enacted, they're not going to do it.
That was actually said in a speech, and I got it confirmed about 10 months ago. It's been repeated for effect. It is exactly the same as them saying that it's not a constitution anymore. All the constitutional bits have been taken out. Really? Sorry, don't believe them. They're lying. Yes, sir.
In the publicity material for this meeting, one of the points that it says that you'll be covering is the EU's underground network in the UK. My hunch is you're referring to common purpose. You haven't actually said very much about common purpose yet. Are you planning on saying much? And my final aspect of that question is, they seem to be able to get such a hold on their graduates. Have you any idea how it is, what it is they're putting across to these people that seems to capture them so effectively?
Yes, certainly. Common purpose, I started getting involved, believe it or not, in the 60s. Lots of people will howl with derision. It didn't exist then. No, it used to be called, you may remember it, the moral majority. It was operated out of Oxford University, and the modern version has evolved. It's a bloody good idea, that's why. That's why they sucker people. They don't tell them the constitutional implications of having a government that isn't elected. They don't tell them the constitutional implications of asking a police officer to be a common purpose but swear an oath of allegiance to the crown. They tell him that they're looking for the new leaders, for the new future. And he's very flattered. And I know a number of people who've been on common purpose. I know quite a few who think it's a load of rubbish. And they say it's just use of words, Aesopian linguistic neural planning, yeah? Which basically means that if you put keywords into things, social deficit, shareholders, stakeholders, they're all common purpose. They're words that actually, when you analyze them, don't mean a bloody thing. They're just catchphrases. Why does it sound good? Because most of us, let's face it. Let's put this another way. Very few of us have managed to establish the independence to do what I'm doing here today. Naming names, because most people have to think about their mortgage. They have to think about their job, about their bank manager, about their loan, about their kids at school, about their elderly parents in care. I don't. I have the independence to say it. It is a tremendous privilege. I have the education to be able to make the point. That's a tremendous privilege. I have learnt to stand on my own feet. That is a tremendous privilege. I was trained by Her Majesty to do it quite well at Sandhurst. That's a tremendous privilege. I've been out and I've seen, about 70-odd countries around this planet. That's a tremendous privilege. But the problem with privilege is, with privilege comes responsibility. And standing here for people to take a pot shot at, hopefully not in literal terms, because I'd rather they didn't take a pot shot. I think we can solve this democratically first. You know, there are various boxes in life, aren't there? I think one of the most important boxes in the world is the ballot box. But if you're betrayed on the ballot box, I'm prepared to take the risk of being put in that ultimate box. But we may just possibly, not yet, but if they keep pushing us, we may need to use an ammunition box. I don't want to use that ammunition box. I may be very good at it, but I don't want to use it. I've seen what it does.
You said one of the reasons that they're so captured once they, the people who become captured on common purpose,
yeah,
is that it's such a good idea. What is such a good idea?
What would you like to be a good idea? I'll sell it to you, sir, and you'll go out of this room thinking it's a wonderful idea. Leadership. You have been specially selected. You've been specially selected from the committee you were on. You've been specially selected as one of the most appropriate parents of kids in this school. You have been specially selected because?
Well, my hunch is that they become eaten up with the idea of the merit of one world government. Or let's start off with...
I don't think they understand that.
I mean, is that what you're saying is the good idea?
I think that the whole point is don't say what is a good idea. Whatever suits you is a good idea will get you involved on the strength of it. Then if you make the grade and you fit in, we'll give you the next good idea. The ultimate aim is a one world domination. The ultimate aim is centralized control. The ultimate aim has gone just down the toilet totally, and all you've seen of it was Northern Rock. The week before I said, this coming weekend, and some of you may have got the email, Poulsen will be over from America. Yeah? Poulsen's head of the Treasury. Poulsen came over to Britain that weekend. Why? When America is in the biggest financial problem in its history, did Poulsen come to Britain? Well, there was a noticeable, shall we say, blood on the carpet in Britain with Northern Rock. It was easier to come over here and for the Americans to underwrite Northern Rock, because I don't believe our government's got enough money to do it. The Americans to underwrite Northern Rock, which is why Poulsen was involved. And Poulsen found it easier to mop up the blood on the carpet in this country than solve the problem of the multiple arterial hemorrhages that are going on in America. Yeah? And why is it all coming a little bit frayed at the edges? It's quite simple, really. You may remember a chap by the name of Chiang Kai-shek, who had a bit of a punch-up with a guy by the name of Mao Zedong, and tucked the Chinese kitty under his arm and legged it to an offshore island called Formosa with the kitty under his arm. And Mao Zedong was about to invade Formosa to get his kitty back. So a rather rapid deal was done by Chiang Kai-shek, and he put the money on deposit with Deutsche Bank, Barclays DCO, Chase Manhattan, underwritten by the American government.
How much money was it?
I don't know the exact figure. It was supposed to pay out February the year before last, having been on deposit for 50 years.
What's it worth today then?
Somewhere in the region of 8 trillion. Yeah? So, not a lot of money actually, it's 8, and a lot of noughts, and they can have all my noughts if they like.
Dollars or? Dollars, pounds or?
Bit hazy, I don't know. I can't answer that question. I'm sure I should be able to, but haven't done enough homework. A solution was sorted out, because what the banks have been doing, because it was a 50-year fund, is they've been playing pass the parcel. And every time their accounts are a bit down, they put their hand in and said, well, we don't have to pay it back for 50 years. And when 50 years came up, they looked inside, it's empty. And the Chinese got a little bit, and shall we say, to quote Princess Anne, naffed off with it. And so they started to call in the bonds. Eventually, something of an accommodation was reached by a chap by the name of Leo Wanta. And he was a financial ambassador for the United States. And the final date for the repayment that was finally arranged on a sum of 4.8 trillion of that money, so not much really, was June this year. In June this year, when it was not repaid, the Chinese started to pull the rug on the money.
Who are they repaying it to? Are they repaying it to Taiwan or to mainland China?
I don't know. But I can tell you which books to buy. It's about that many. And I'm not an economist. I have a rough idea, but I'm not an economist. I have ploughed my way through, but don't read them in winter. Yeah? Read them in the summer because it's cold with your shoes and socks off trying to count the noughts. You know, I just got lost. But I suggest you start out by reading all the back issues of Christopher Story. And Christopher Story owns the International Monetary Review. And hopefully you've all got, a white card with Christopher Story's number on it. If you could pass them around, do keep one of the cards. Look him up on the internet. Now, the money didn't come up. Now, the interesting thing is China has been dumping dollars. I don't know if you're aware of this. One of the big dumps of dollars was they bought Zimbabwe, which is why Robert Mugabe has not been sorted out. We didn't. Then they bought Somalia. Then they bought Sudan, which is why we're too frightened to go into Darfur and do anything about that. They own the mineral rights in Zaire and the Congo, and they have a joint control of the mineral rights in Angola. They've also put a lot of money into Thabo Mbeki's pocket to act as a buffer zone for Robert Mugabe. Thabo Mbeki is South Africa. Meanwhile, we build a statue to a terrorist in London. Mandela. Mandela, as a point of interest, is nothing more than a scum-of-the-earth terrorist. He tried to blow my wife up. Quite literally, when she was at kindergarten. I can understand why he was a terrorist, but I don't think we should be commemorating as a nation terrorists. I now see that we want to commemorate Mahatma Gandhi. I can't work that out either, because I know rather a lot about Mahatma Gandhi too, because I lived in India and then moved to Pakistan at partition. Okay, I was very small, but he did nick my family business, so I have a bit of a vested interest there. So I think we actually have to, again, come back to making our politicians accountable. Does that sort of cover? It's a huge subject.
As far as the idea that they're sold on in common purpose, then, you're saying it
global
is
governance.
Nothing in particular other than they are told and want to believe that they are the chosen people to lead it.
Perfectly true, and everybody basically wants to belong. We all want to belong to something. You know, it's a funny thing about humans. We're pack animals. And if you can belong to a group that has had 80,000 graduates, well, you're part of a big group, aren't you? It's a little bit like the doctor in downtown Calcutta, who has a big sign outside here, in brass, Mr. Mukherjee, Bombay, MD, Bombay, FLD. Well, a failed doctor in India is better than no doctor at all. And he's practicing medicine, full stop, because he's better than somebody who doesn't even know how to wash their hands. You know, people like to belong. Yes, sir?
You mentioned ballot boxes. I wonder if you could elaborate on postal voting, because if you wish, after that, I heard a very interesting case history of the recent voting for Highlands, which you may know about, this coming from John Strafford.
I think that we need to strenuously avoid postal voting. I think that if somebody can't be bothered to find somebody to wheel them, carry them, or otherwise get them to a voting point in this country, they have rather sort of surrendered the vote. I do not believe in a vote just because it's easy. I don't have a problem with a compulsory vote, as long as you can make the comment on the top, leave the EU, which I would ask everybody in this room to do at any vote that comes up, because it doesn't really matter what you vote for. The same shower of shysters are going to get in there, aren't they?
If we make the correct cross and still put on ballot paper, leave the EU, does that invalidate?
It invalidates.
Did you
Brian?
Did you hear the SDP voting behind them?
Yeah, yes, I did.
The audience might be interested in that.
I think we're moving beyond our remit, other than to say I think we need to strenuously avoid. Brian?
Great. I just wondered if I could just focus in, or get you to focus in again on basically the fraud, corruption and general misbehaviour of our politicians. Did you all hear me the other side of the room or not? Okay.
Well, it was at a Liberal party, a Liberal Democrat party, wasn't it, where the speaker said, can you hear me at the back? And somebody put his hand up and said, I can hear you, but I'd gladly swap with someone else.
That may be true, but I think there's a couple of points here, is that everybody, I believe, in this room, I think I'm right, saying is looking for a solution to what's happening in the country. What can we do? How do we change it? And to my mind, the first thing you have to understand in order to look for the solution is to understand how badly the country is corrupted. We are talking about corruption, horrible corruption, money, power, drugs, women, children, horrible corruption.
Can we choose?
Through all of the key institutions, and we're talking about that sort of corruption at the high level of all the parties in UK. To keep it fair, you've mentioned the Labour Party quite a bit and history of members. Would you like to tell us something about the history or those in power at the top of the Conservative Party?
I'm less aware of direct attempts to destroy the country by the Tory party. That doesn't mean to say they don't exist. I am less aware of them. The reason being that I'm a socialist. I always have been a socialist all my life. I've always voted socialist until the EU issue came up. And under normal circumstances, I would still vote for the Conservative Party, the only socialist party in Britain. The only socialist party during the last 50 years in Britain. Socialism is actually socially contributing, not just putting your hand in other people's pockets and trying to nick the money. I'm less aware of the Tories. I'm very aware of what Heath did, and I think everybody here is aware of what Heath did. I'm very aware of some of the betrayals of the early days of Margaret Thatcher, because she didn't know what was going on, because she actually wasn't the sharpest knife in the box, in political terms. I'm very aware of the treason of Howe and Hurd. I'm very aware of the continuing treason of a member of many of the Tory peers, and the treason of Ken Clarke. And I'm very well aware of treason from people like Francis Fraud, who is fundamentally working for the trilaterals. And it is a huge, huge across-party treason. They have actually sold themselves in most instances that it's a good idea for the country. And some of them are so stupid they believe it. But then again, I hate to do this to cavalry officers, but there was the old saying, wasn't it, that he was so stupid that even some of his fellow officers noticed. And that sums up an awful lot of politicians. David Cameron, apart from his involvement with drugs and his wife's addiction, and apart from the fact that she went to South Africa to be sweated out, so did his sister, I cannot actually lay a finger on him other than, as an old Etonian, I'd trust him as far as I could kick him. I have almost without exception, and I say almost, there are some notable exceptions. Every time I have had dealings with old Etonians, they have betrayed you in one format or another, but they have a different morality, which is don't get caught. And it's not a morality I admire. David Cameron falls into that school in my thinking, and he is looking for his glory, and he is looking for the glory he has been told as an old Etonian and a wealthy young man married to an even wealthier wife with a terribly wealthy family who manipulate them. He has been told that to an extent what he does is right because he does it, which is not a standard of morality I understand, condone or agree with. I think the guy is a crook. I think that he is purely a plant, put there and manipulated, originally by Francis Fraud, but they had to have a scapegoat. Francis Fraud is still in there. Dedicated long-term member of the Trilateral Commission. Regular attendee at Bilderberg meetings, together with Ken Clarke. In my opinion, utterly corrupt. I think the Tory party has this major problem that it's power at any price. And so they're prostitutes to power. I think the Labour Party, they fall into a different category. I don't think, you know, I'm not angry with the Labour Party at what they've done, because I expected them to betray me. I'm angry with the Tory party. I'm bloody furious with UKIP, because these are the people who betrayed me, not the Labour Party. The Labour Party never said they'd do anything for me. They always told me they'd screw me rotten if they got half a chance. Doesn't answer your question, but perhaps it goes some way towards it. David, can I take a question?
Is there any truth with the European Is there any truth with the European Union that it's a vehicle for perpetration of the German Fourth Reich? Yes.
Is there any truth that the European Union is a vehicle for a Fourth Reich? No, I don't think there is. I think it's more complicated than that. Let me do a very, you know, tell me to shut up if I'm boring you rigid, but let me do a very rapid sprint through history. Bismarck started amalgamating Germany. I should be letting Harry do this. If for no other reason than he lived through the whole... my apologies. But he is far more of the German expert. It is not a field of expertise to me, but it is a field of general knowledge. Bismarck started amalgamating the princely states of Germany. This continued. The German High Command came over to Britain. They attended Cowes Week in 1914, and they were trying to convince the British that we sided with the Germans to create a European Soviet, a union. I said earlier that the French voted in favour not of a European Union, but in favour of not being ruled by the Parisian French. I'm sure all of you have worked it out, but do you know where the word France comes from? It's the word Frank. They are one of the Frankish tribes of Germany. And if you look at a map of France, and let's say that's France, and you've got Brest and sort of Biarritz and the Med along here, roughly. This piece here, a great tongue into the middle of France, is basically German rootstock. It's also, if you look at it, exactly the same part that makes a habit of surrendering at the first possible opportunity to Germany. Yeah? It's also the entire structure of that area are the Frankish énarques, École Nationale, whatever it is, which in...
Charlemagne was the king of the Franks.
Indeed, but let's also not get carried away with Charlemagne. The European Soviet keeps on selling us Charlemagne. Charlemagne actually achieved absolutely blow all. He was something of a disaster. Charlemagne inherited from his father a kingdom that was created in blood and warfare, strife and killings. He held the kingdom for, I think it was 30 years, trying to bring law to it, and then it collapsed into blood and warfare and strife and killings. So Charlemagne was merely somebody who held it all together when it was handed to him. And we must remember that the European Soviet bases itself on Charlemagne, so it expects to collapse in about 30 years. The other thing that it must remember is that its emblem is Europa, isn't it? And don't forget that Europa was led to her wedding and rape by her father on a bull. Well, haven't we been? We've been led into this sort of gang marriage and as a country sequentially raped by every member who wants a free handout from it. We even hear the IDG group, which is the group UKIP belongs to in the European Union, standing up in a meeting, Jens Piers Bonde, in Strasbourg, at the last Strasbourg meeting, which was about 2.5 weeks ago, and he said it's outrageous that Britain gets a rebate, because it means that poor countries like Romania have to subsidize a rich country like Britain. That's the UKIP group. Yeah? That's their group leader. Derek Clark signed an agreement. He's a UKIP MEP. Well, a long retired, fairly hopeless, stinks master in a junior school. Yeah? Doesn't even have a degree in science. And he puts himself across as a scientist now that he's an MEP. He'd been retired for about 15 years. Derek went to Romania on behalf of UKIP and the group and signed an agreement with the Romanians that there should be more subsidiarity to the European Parliament by the member nations. He signed an agreement with the Romanians to work with the Romanians in the European committees, to work with the European committees to improve the way they worked. I thought he was sent there to get us out. Oh, by the way, Nigel Farage authorised him to do this. Sorry, they've lost the plot.
Who's going to save the country?
You are. And you. Yes, madam.
Yes, thank you. I've got the greatest of respect for groups like this, and there are quite a few of them, I believe. Peter, my friend, just asked a very interesting question. The only way to save the country, and don't be shocked, please, I'm not a thug, I'm not a Nazi, is a political party.
Don't agree.
Well, all right, you've had your say, let me finish mine. The only way is through a political party, and I would recommend, and I've been a member for 10 years, the British National Party. Yeah. The British National Party. I've been a member for 10 years. I have never seen or heard anything that has shocked me or upset me. I've never seen anyone at a meeting that I would not have in my house. That's the way forward.
Could I just make a comment? The BNP isn't really very sure how serious a threat the EU is, and has not taken on board the very serious plans that we have put forward to them.
How many meetings have you attended, may I ask? How many? How many? How many times have you heard Nick Griffin speak? How many? Go on.
Personally, many. I'm actually happy to deal with this if people want me to, but it's something I would rather not deal with. And may I make a point here? We have a huge enemy. Fighting between the disparate little groups is pointless. I personally, and I am firmly on record as this, would rather be a member of the European Union than vote BNP. And I would rather be dead than a member of the European Union if it was irrevocable. That may give you an indication of how strongly I feel about the BNP. I revile on every count, every aspect of the BNP. There is not one single solitary word that comes from the BNP that is not founded on the blood of 3,000 to 4,000 blacks hanged because they're black. And that is where BNP funding comes from. No, not rubbish at all. I have the videos, I've watched videos of Nick Griffin fundraising with the Ku Klux Klan. I have watched videos of Nick Griffin. I have gone to verbal war with Nick Griffin on many occasions. Just mention my name to Nick. Anytime you like. I'm sure you haven't. He runs a mile. He even set one of his publicity officers onto me a little while ago, who was sending round photographs of me, constructed, pictures of me when I had my operation, in a coffin. They're scum. And I'm sorry you haven't seen through them. No, I did not. I said, I'm sorry you have not seen through them.
Well, I'm quite an intelligent person. I've been with...
Inadequately so, madam. Inadequately so. Please read some of their background. Read Chesterton. Read their founding documents. Deal with people like John Tyndall.
John Tyndall is a long time ago.
He is a long time ago.
They do...
I'm sorry, I have no time for them. They are still colluding. They are still colluding with the white supremacist movement in America. Point one. Point two, a great deal of their baseline funding in the early days came from Lady Birdwood. Until they repudiate both of those very publicly, I will have no time for them. That is not on a personal basis with private members, just as with UKIP, I have a tremendous amount of time for the private members.
I'm a friend of Janet's, and I've learned a lot about the BNP since we've been friendly. I'm trying to look at this objectively. There is, on the face of it, there's a tremendous amount of good in the BNP. You hone in particularly on their fundraising and reliance from highly racist groups.
Please, may I correct you?
Just let me finish this point. They're the best organised political party that I have seen, and they have a comprehensive fundraising policy across the board. The statement by yourself that they might in some way be dependent on
no, I didn't say dependent. Their foundations are dependent on.
Would not stand up in my book. They have a very broad funding platform.
If you want a really good political party, a brilliant one, and you really want to set it up perfectly, can I give you one of the best role model policies in the world? It doesn't make the Nazis good people. But by God, they had a good organization. By God, it worked like a well-oiled machine.
Their policy was flawed right from day one.
And I contend that the BNP's policy is flawed right from day one because it is founded and will not renounce racism. I do not disagree with you. They have some very good points on other issues, but they will not renounce racism. I have seen racism. I've found people killed because of their colour.
Well, their publicly stated policy on race
is a lie, based on their actual, what they're doing.
Well, you're saying that what they're saying is not in fact what they believe.
I am saying outright it is a lie.
Right. Yeah, but I have no knowledge on that.
I do.
What their appealing to people on is wholly laudable.
Oh yes, yes. Very clever. Very clever indeed. But what they're founded on is a lie.
I asked earlier on who's going to save us.
It ain't going to be the BNP.
There was an article.
They only have 10,000 members now.
So who is going to save?
You, and you, and you, and you, and you, and me. We're going to save it, and we're going to do it, and I have repeated again and again. 1, we are going to put on our ballot papers, leave the EU. 2, every time a politician is corrupt, we are going to expose them for that corruption. 3, never back... How?
Rubbish. These bloody screwing us for years and people have been exposing them and nothing has happened.
That's just not true.
It won't happen if some moron like you gets up and opens their mouth. Come on, we don't do that.
Can we move on?
Thank you.
Can we move on?
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Can we move on?
Yeah, certainly. We must actually stop fighting small groups. I've never addressed the BNP except when people try and sell it to me.
How do we know, what proof is there that Heath and Ripon and Jenkins were members of the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst intelligence department?
Probably the best provenance of that is to read Christopher Story's expose on it.
This information apparently came from MI6, did it?
I don't know. I know what I've been told, but I don't know.
I mean, I would like to publish it in the paper, but I would like to have some authoritative source for it.
It has been published in a number of places.
Do you think there are any people still in the Conservative Party who are members of the DVD?
I think there's a strong possibility.
Any candidates come to mind?
No. Many come to mind, but none with adequate provenance to put their name to it.
Can you give me a list of those who come to mind?
No, because I don't have the provenance. And I'm not going to besmirch somebody's name on insufficient evidence.
Can you tell us of those who may be dead that you had last week or
My provenance falls into the same category, and I think although I'm safe legally doing so, I'm not sure I'm safe morally doing so. I would say that there is no doubt that Heath had very close connections with. I don't think there's much doubt that Ripon had close connections with. I have Gray. I'm not sure he needed to.
Another 10 minutes. 40 minutes.
He was a wealthy and independent man.
40 minutes.
Yes, we hear of these people, but I cannot provide you with any sort of provenance. Therefore, I think it would be irresponsible to name them. I'm perfectly happy to cite Major.
We can't hear a word.
My apologies.
We don't know what's going on, who's talking about what. We sit in dead silence.
My apologies. We really ought to take a question from this end.
It's 5 to 5. I just signalled it.
Mm-hmm.
Corruption and the behind the scenes associations. The thing that comes over to me that worries me is that even if a miracle happened and we were able to get out of the European Union, well, I hope nobody will shout me down. The biggest one is a lot of people in this room, I think, will believe that that's the only way out. We've got to get out. We can't just half be in Europe. We've got to get out of the system because it's so undemocratic and it's corrupt and all the other things. But if we got a referendum, if the decision, and if we've got to get some kind of government, we've got the guts to get out of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
What happens then if it's so built up and completely subversed into the European bribery system? Even if we got the agreement to get out, what are your feelings on what would go on then? And the other thing is that I think it was very objective, what you were just doing. People are asking here, what can we do to help or to get us out?
And you said, market map. And the other thing I think you said was that we can't squabble amongst ourselves all the different things. Anything else?
Well, I'd like to address the lady at the back without her misunderstanding it, please. I actually have a lot of time for the members of the BNP because they're very dedicated. They're very like UKIP. Not necessarily in all the everyday machinations within their party, but they're very like them. They are very like a saying that we all know, lions led by donkeys. And unfortunately, their leadership will not renounce what I cannot come to terms with, and will not, under any circumstances, comes to terms with. They will not renounce their racism. If they renounce their racism and have a complete change of leadership, I don't have a problem with the BNP, as long as they honestly admit where they came from, and as long as they honestly move forward with a view to not being a racist foundation organization. I don't have any problem with that. But for as long as they are fundraising with the KKK and other organizations in America, and even if they now claim they're not, for as long as they do not renounce the fact that they ever were, then I cannot find them an acceptable political party. They are not a part of a ballot box procedure to me. It's entirely up to other people. I don't want to encourage fighting between one group and another. I can give you a dozen organizations that are anti the EU that if somebody forced me, they would force me into a position of fighting them. I don't want to. Another way we can do this, and I'm going to give Alan a chance now, if he'd come up to the front and give us not more than 5. Yeah. You happy with that? But do it from the front.
Wait a minute, you haven't answered half the question of racism, right? He's had his chance. No, hold on. Can I just deal with the question of racism? You talk about racism. Nobody's born...
This is out of your 5 minutes.
No, nobody's
yes,
born...
Yes.
No, I'm answering the points you're making. Nobody's born prejudiced. You get prejudice from the way that you grow up and what's happening around you. I grew up living under a West Indian run brothel and over the top of a West Indian run nightclub. What with prostitutes shouting and being scrolled down the stairs all night long and ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum from the hi-fi unit downstairs, for 6 months of my life I didn't have any sleep at night. Well, so racism doesn't come from nowhere. Now I'll come...
I didn't know you lived upstairs.
Now I'll come to the front. No.
We have a raffle to do, which I'm doing in exactly 5 minutes. Is that all right?
That's fine. That's fine. Take it on.
Yeah.
Right. That's fine.
We're going to do the raffle immediately after Alan, and then David is going to speak for 5 minutes as well. All right?
I actually don't profess to have a fantastic education. I don't. It's not there. I'm not going to pretend that it is. However, I was a police officer, and I look at things from a policeman's perspective. Is there a law? Yes, there is. Has it been broken? Yes, it has. Whose job is it to fix it? The police officer and then the courts. That is it. This document here, which we owe Dave Barmby, who's a fantastic researcher, contains something like 150 separate documents which prove that Heath formed conspiracies to commit sedition and treason when he did it. This I have taken to the police, and I'm currently negotiating a date when I can go and see the Metropolitan Police, because my local police did nothing about it. When I see the Metropolitan Police, I will be using other information supplied by them to prove the criminal offence of compounding treason against Thames Valley Police where I live. That's that one. Secondly, there is this piece of paper. This is the Parliamentary Oath Bill. It was passed in 2001, and what it has done is it has taken away from the Queen all of her rights and prerogatives. That is the Parliamentary Oath Bill. there are 2 new oaths, one for the Commons, one for the Lords, which do not mention the sovereign in any way, shape or form. This is a page out of a law book. The bit at the bottom, which is highlighted in orange or red, is quite specific. It says that if you remove from the sovereign or attempt to remove from the sovereign any of her styles, honours or rights, it is without doubt, without question, treason. Absolutely. This document, passed through Parliament, is in fact treason. And when I see the police, and I'm hoping to get an interview with John Yates at Scotland Yard, I will in fact ask him to investigate this treason along with Heath's treason. And I think that the way that we deal with this is not realistically through parliamentary parties or political parties. I think they are not going to go anywhere. I think everybody should get a copy of the papers in this. I think they should take it to their local police station, and I think they should say, I want to report a crime. Because it's my right to report a crime if it's occurred, and it's your job to record it and investigate it. Thames Valley Police have told me that in point of fact, there is evidence in here which could obtain convictions against the surviving conspirators of Ted Heath's. But they don't want to deal with it. And the reason they don't want to deal with it is because if they prove the conspiracies existed in the first place, which knocks the basis out of the 1972 Act, because we can't possibly live with a law which was formed by rights of treason, that wouldn't be just. It would contravene every principle of natural justice we've ever fought for in this country. But they don't want to do that, because if they do that, and a chief inspector from their complaints department told me this, if they went ahead and got convictions against Heath's conspirators, they would then have to go ahead and arrest every government minister for the last 35 years. Anybody here got a problem with that?
No, that's fine. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I sure as hell don't. For one reason or another, there's none of them earning their wages. They just do them for fraud, for obtaining money by deception. That'll do it. But basically, what I'm saying to you is, this information in here is on CD-ROMs. Dave Barnby there has the CD-ROMs, which he can let you have for a small thing. He's covering his production costs on it, and that's it, which you can then print out and take to your local police station. If that is done all across the country, every police station in the country will refuse to deal with it, because it's a hot potato, isn't it? Yeah. It's an absolute hot potato. So you then go back and you do what I have done. You find out the man who refused to deal with it, and you submit a formal complaint against him for a serious neglect of duty and the criminal offence of misprision of treason. Now, that then means the complaints department do it. I did this in Thames Valley Police. The complaints department for Thames Valley Police chucked it out, said there's no evidence, right? Nonsense, of course there's evidence, there's loads of evidence. The fact he wrote me a letter telling me he wasn't going to do it is evidence of the fact that he's guilty of misprision of treason and neglect of duty. All they have to do is check this to make sure that the crimes occurred in the first place. They've done that because they tell me they'd have to arrest every government minister for the last 35 years. They don't want to do it. I'm now taking this to the Metropolitan Police. If you all go back to your places where you come from, and you all do this, and if this is done right across the county you live in, and everybody goes and does it in their own police station, sooner or later, the complaints department for your police force at the main county force headquarters is going to have a mountain of complaints on it. All from people all over the area complaining about exactly the same thing. Now what do? Can they ignore that amount of public feeling? Of course they can't. Because if they do, then the public will simply turn around and they can say, either we're not paying our police rate because you're obviously not worth it, or they can say, well, we insist that you do this. We insist that you do it. And if you don't do it, we will report your police force to another police force to be engaged. Fine, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I salute you for your courage. I just want to ask one simple question.
Yes.
How many people in this hall, truthfully, are prepared to go back into their local police station and do as our friend has the courage to do? About half a dozen.
No, there's more than that. You know, I can't count. I've got no education. I can see there's more than half a dozen.
Okay. Then at our next meeting, I will find out how many of you have done it, okay? I'm not sure I have the courage.
One quick question. Can it be very quick? We still have a draw to do and David notes. And then a quick wrap up. I know.
So there is an aspect, but the only thing that will worry me is the application that we had done with all our contributions. Many people know it, Michael stressed it.
Yes.
So we all doing the same page.
I think that's it. I think an important point has been made in that the last time we went for misprision of treason, about 2,500 of us did it. It achieved the sum total of nothing, but it made the point. It also gave us a launching pad because it was drawn up by barristers and everybody put in the same documentation. Unfortunately, it ground to a halt with sanity and the petition to the Queen, which many of you, I'm sure, were involved in. And we ended up in the House of Lords with me having a row with one of the senior lords, which was quite fun.
Anyway, thank you very much. I'm calling on Harry to make this brief thanks.
I would like us all to thank our speaker for a most resounding performance.
Yeah, yeah.
Here, here.